The screaming started at 03 for 7 hours. Captain Darius Kane bolted upright in his bunk aboard the cargo hauler Wanderer's End, his hand instinctively reaching for the plasma pistol. That hadn't left his hip in 3 years. The sound cut through the ship's hull like a blade through flesh, high-pitched, alien, and utterly terrified. Computer, lights. He barked, rolling out of bed as the corridor illuminated. The screaming continued, echoing from the cargo hold below. Kane's bare feet slapped against cold metal as he sprinted through the narrow passages of his ship, a converted Terran Defense Corps frigate he'd bought with blood money after the Proxima massacre. The cargo hold's blast doors hung open, revealing a scene that made Kane's battle-hardened stomach clench. Crates of medical supplies, his legitimate cargo, lay scattered across the deck, but in the center of the destruction crouched something that shouldn't exist. A child, not human. The crystalline scales covering its small body caught the overhead lights, throwing prismatic reflections across the walls. Its eyes were too large, too knowing, glowing with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with its rapid breathing. Blood violet, and luminescent, dripped from multiple wounds across its torso. Impossible, Kane whispered. The Velter Empire had been extinct for 2 centuries. Everyone knew the story, a proud race of warriors and scholars, wiped out by the hegemony of Korthik in a campaign so brutal it had shocked even the war-hardened galaxy. No survivors, no refugees, no children. The creature, the child, locked eyes with him. In that instant, Kane felt something he'd thought died with his union on Proxima: recognition. This wasn't just fear in those glowing orbs. It was intelligence, understanding, hope. Easy, Kane said, raising his hand slowly. I'm not going to hurt you. The child's breathing slowed fractionally. It tried to speak, but only managed a weak chirping sound. Kane had heard that language before, in classified briefings about archaeological sites, ancient Velter, the tongue of an empire that had once spanned 40 systems before the Korthik turned their worlds to glass. A proximity alarm shrieked through the ship. Kane's blood turned to ice as he recognized the signature. On his scanner, 3 Korthik destroyers, emerging from hyperspace like sharks scenting blood. They'd found him, found the child. Computer, raise shields and prepare for evasive maneuvers, Kane commanded, never taking his eyes off the wounded alien. The child tried to stand, legs shaking, and Kane made a decision that would reshape the galaxy. He scooped the small form into his arms, feeling the strange warmth of its crystalline skin against his chest. The child weighed almost nothing, but in that moment, Kane felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. The Korthik had spent 100 years ensuring the Velter remained extinct. They'd systematically hunted down every artifact, every trace of the ancient empire. They'd built their own dominion on the bones of a civilization that had once been the galaxy's greatest beacon of knowledge and justice. But they'd missed one hang-on kid, Kane muttered, carrying the child toward the ship's medical bay as the Wanderer's End shuddered under the first barrage of Korthik weapons fire. We're going to make some enemies today. The galaxy had been dark for 2 centuries. The Korthik hegemony ruled through fear, crushing any species that showed signs of advancement. The Terran Defense Corps fought a losing war against overwhelming odds. Independent worlds lived in constant terror of raids and conquest. But as Kane strapped the Velter child into the medical bay's emergency bed and felt the ship's engine scream to life, he knew something fundamental had changed. The last ember of the greatest empire in galactic history was alive, breathing, and looking at him with eyes that held the memory of 1,000 worlds. The Korthik wanted to finish what they'd started centuries ago. Kane intended to make them regret they'd ever begun. The first Korthik plasma bolt missed the Wanderer's End by less than 50 meters, close enough that Kane felt the ship's whole superstructure groan under the thermal stress. He threw himself into the pilot's seat, fingers dancing across controls. He could operate blindfolded, evasive pattern Delta 7. He commanded the ship's AI and boost power to the rear deflectors. The Velter child lay unconscious in the medical bay, violet blood slowly being replaced by synthetic plasma as the ship's automated systems fought to keep the small alien alive. Kane had activated the emergency beacon, a desperate gamble that might bring help or simply attract more enemies. The lead Korthik destroyer was a Deathbringer class, its hull bristling with weapons that could crack a moon, its escorts flanked in imperfect formation, their commanders no doubt relishing the prospect of finishing what their ancestors had started. A known vessel, a voice crackled through the comm system, speaking in the guttural language of the Korthik. You carry contraband property of the hegemony, Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Kane's response was to angle the ship toward the nearby asteroid field and push the engines to maximum burn. The Wanderer's End wasn't built for this kind of punishment, but she'd held together through worse. The asteroid belt offered cover, and cover men options. The child's eyes fluttered open as the ship bucked under another near miss. Despite the pain medication flooding its system, intelligence flickered in those prismatic orbs. It spoke a single word in ancient Velter, and Kane's translation software provided the meaning: protector. That's right, kid, Kane said through gritted teeth as he threaded the ship between the house-sized asteroids. I'm not letting them take you. The Corthic formation split, trying to surround him. It was a textbook maneuver, one Kane had seen executed against his own forces at Proxima. But the alien commanders had made one crucial error. They assumed they were hunting a merchant, not a veteran of the Rim Wars. Kane cut the engines and spun the ship around its center axis, bringing the Wanderer's End single torpedo tube to bear on the lead destroyer. The weapon was meant for clearing asteroid debris, not ship-to-ship combat, but desperation made him creative. The torpedo streaked through space, its primitive guidance system confused by the asteroid field's magnetic interference. The Corthic captain barely had time to register the threat before the warhead detonated against his ship's forward shields, creating a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded his sensors. It was the opening Kane needed. He fired the ship's thrusters in a series of rapid bursts, using the asteroids as cover while the Corthic tried to reacquire his position. The maneuver bought him precious seconds, but against 3 destroyers, seconds wouldn't be enough. The second destroyer found him first, its plasma cannons lighting up the space around the Wanderer's End with deadly fire. Kane felt the ship's shields collapse under the barrage, felt the hull plating begin to buckle. Emergency alarms screamed through the corridors. Then the impossible happened. A new signature appeared on the sensors, a ship emerging from hyperspace at maximum velocity. Its hull configuration unlike anything in the current galactic databases. It was sleek, angular, built for speed and stealth rather than brute force. Most importantly, it was firing on the Corthic. The mystery ship's weapons weren't plasma or projectile-based. They fired beams of pure energy that seemed to bend space itself, striking the Corthic destroyers with surgical precision. The lead destroyer's shields collapsed entirely, its hull plating peeling away like paper. A known vessel. This is Captain Kane of the Wanderer's End. He transmitted on all frequencies. I don't know who you are, but your timing is perfect. The response came in accented but clear standard. Captain Kane, this is Commander Lara Voss of the Terran Defense Corps' vessel Shadowhawk. We received your emergency beacon and came as fast as we could. Kane's blood turned cold. The TDC didn't have ships like the one he was seeing. Their vessels were built like battering rams, designed to trade blow for blow with Corthic dreadnoughts. This ship moved like a predator, striking and withdrawing before the enemy could respond. Commander Voss, he replied carefully, I wasn't aware the Corps had. There's a lot you don't know about recent developments, Captain, Voss replied, but that can wait. Right now, we need to get you and your passenger to safety. The Velter child stirred in the medical bay, its eyes focusing on something beyond the walls of the ship. It spoke again, a longer phrase this time, and Kane's translation software provided a chilling interpretation. The sleepers are awakening. The Corthic fleet arrived in force 6 hours later, 12 destroyers, 4 cruisers, and a dreadnought whose mass signature made Kane's instruments recalibrate twice. The Shadowhawk had led them to a hidden base in the Kepler Nebula, a place that officially didn't exist on any star charts. But as the massive Corthic formation took position around the nebula's edge, Kane began to understand that Commander Voss and her ship were part of something much larger than a simple rescue mission. Captain, Voss said, her image flickering on the bridge's main screen, we need to discuss your passenger. Kane looked down at the Velter child, who sat beside him on the bridge, its wounds healing with remarkable speed. The medical bay's scanners had revealed something extraordinary. The child's cellular structure was unlike anything in the current galactic database. Its body was rebuilding itself at the molecular level, incorporating the synthetic plasma into its own biology. His name is HFY, Kane said, having spent the last few hours learning basic Velter from the ship's linguistic database. He's the last of his kind. No, Voss replied, her expression grim. He's the first. The child HFY looked up at Kane with eyes that now held flecks of gold among the shifting colors. When he spoke, his voice was stronger, more assured. The Korthik believed they destroyed us. They were wrong. Kane felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. What do you mean? My people, HFY continued, his standard improving with each word. We did not simply die. We transformed, became something the Korthik could not see, could not kill. We waited, we watched, we learned. On the main screen, the Korthik dreadnought Worldbreaker moved into position. Its captain, Admiral Dexmer, was a veteran of the original Velter extermination campaign. His message was broadcast on all frequencies. Surrender the abomination, or we will reduce this system to atoms. Voss's response was to power up the hidden base's defenses. What Kane had assumed was a simple asteroid became something else entirely. As massive weapons platforms emerged from concealment, the technology was unlike anything he'd seen, a fusion of Terran engineering and something far more advanced. The Velter didn't just die, Voss explained. Some of them escaped. They've been working with human scientists for decades, developing new technologies, new strategies. The ship you're on isn't just Terran, it's a hybrid. The first Korthik attack came without warning. The Worldbreaker's main guns fired in sequence, each shot capable of cracking a planet's crust. But the hidden base's shields held technology that bent space around them like a protective shell. Kane watched in amazement as the defense platforms returned fire. Their weapons punched through Korthik shields like they were made of paper, sending the destroyers spinning away in pieces. But the enemy had numbers, and their return fire was devastating. The base shuddered as multiple impacts overloaded the shield generators. Emergency lights flickered throughout the corridors, and Kane could hear the groaning of metal under stress. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and trapped, Captain HFY said, his small hand touching Kane's arm. There's something you must know. I am not just a survivor. I am a key. A key to what? To awakening my people, to returning the Velter to the galaxy. The child's eyes now glowed with an inner fire that made the air around him shimmer. But the process requires a catalyst, a moment of desperation so complete that it breaks the barriers between what is and what must be. The base's shields collapsed entirely as the Korthik fleet concentrated their fire. Explosions rocked the hidden facility, and Kane realized they had minutes before the entire structure was destroyed. Voss, he called over the comm, we need to evacuate. Now. Negative, Captain. This is where we make our stand. Her voice was steady despite the chaos around them. The Velter had been waiting to centuries for this moment. If we run now, the galaxy remains under Korthik rule forever. HFY stood, his small form radiating an energy that made the bridge's instruments flicker. Captain Kane, you saved my life. Now I ask you to save my people. Help me awaken them. How? By believing that the impossible is merely the improbable waiting for its moment. The child placed both hands on the ship's control console, and Kane felt the Wanderer's end respond to his touch. The engines hummed with new power. The weapon systems reconfigured themselves, and the ship's hull began to emit the same prismatic glow as HFY's skin. Outside, the Korthik fleet closed in for the kill, their weapons charging for a final devastating barrage. But in the depths of the nebula, something else was stirring, something that had been sleeping for 200 years. The transformation of the Wanderer's end began at the molecular level. Kane watched in fascination and terror as his ship's hull plating restructured itself, forming the same crystalline patterns that covered HFY's skin. The cargo hauler's crude lines became elegant, predatory, and when the child pressed his hands against the control console, the ship responded like a living thing. The Velter were never just a species, HFY explained, his voice now carrying harmonics that made the bridge's instruments resonate. We were a symbiosis, biology and technology, consciousness and machine, all bound together by what your people call quantum entanglement. The Korthik fleet had formed a perfect encirclement around the hidden base. Admiral Dexmer's flagship Worldbreaker led the assault, its massive plasma cannons reducing the outer defense platforms to superheated debris. The base's shields flickered and died under the concentrated bombardment. Voss, King called over the comm, whatever you're planning, now would be a good time. Stand by, Captain. The awakening sequence is beginning. On the main screen, space itself seemed to ripple. The nebulous gas cloud swirled in patterns that hurt to look at, and Kane's instruments detected massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Something was emerging from the quantum foam between dimensions. The first Velter vessel materialized directly behind the Korthik battle line. It was beautiful and terrible. its hull a living crystal that pulsed with internal light. The ship's weapons weren't mounted on the exterior, they were grown from the hull itself. Organic technology that fired coherent energy beams capable of cutting through Korthic armor, like it was cardboard. But the Korthic had learned from their ancestors. Mistakes. Admiral Lexmer's response was immediate and brutal. The Worldbreaker turned its full firepower on the emerging Velter ship, joined by 4 destroyers in a coordinated strike that would have vaporized a conventional vessel. The Velter ship absorbed the attack, its crystalline hull converting the incoming energy into fuel for its own weapons. But the cost was visible. Sections of the ship's living hull cracked and went dark, and its return fire was noticeably weaker. "They're still vulnerable," Kane observed. "Whatever these awakened Velter are, they're not invincible." "No," HFY replied sadly, "we sacrificed much to survive." Each awakening cost. More Velter ships emerged from the quantum foam, but the Korthic were ready. Dexmer had deployed his fleet in a formation designed specifically for fighting incorporeal enemies overlapping fields, a fire that left no dimensional space unguarded. When the Velter tried to phase shift around the Korthic positions, they found themselves caught in crossfire that tore through their hulls. The battle turned savage. A Velter cruiser, its hull cracked and bleeding energy, rammed directly into a Korthic destroyer. Both ships vanished in a flash of light that temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. When the glare faded, nothing remained but expanding gas clouds and debris. Captain Voss transmitted, her voice tight with strain. "We're losing." The Korthic came prepared for this. They've been planning for the Velter's return for decades. Kane watched as another Velter ship died. Its living HULL crystallizing into lifeless matter as its consciousness was extinguished. The awakened Velter were powerful, but they were also few. Each loss was irreplaceable. "There has to be another way," he said, looking at HFY. "You're the key to awakening them. Can you call more?" "The process is not unlimited," the child replied. "Each awakening requires a portion of my life force. I can call perhaps a dozen more ships. But what? But I will not survive the process, and without me, the Velter will return to their quantum sleep within solar hours." The implications hit Kane like a physical blow. The Velter's return depended on the child's sacrifice. They could win this battle, but the cost would be the extinction of their entire species. "There has to be another way," Kane repeated, but even as he spoke, he knew there wasn't. The Korthic had planned well, prepared thoroughly. They learned from the original war, adapted their tactics to counter Velter technology. On the screen, the Worldbreaker fired its main weapon into the heart of the hidden base. The station's quantum reactors overloaded, creating a chain reaction that consumed 3 Velter ships and 4 Korthic destroyers in a ball of fusing matter. The explosion was visible from several light years away. "Voss," King called, but there was no response. The Shadowhawk was nowhere to be seen on his sensors. "She lives," HFY said softly. "I can feel her consciousness in the quantum foam, but her ship is damaged, and she cannot fight." The Korthic fleet reorganized, their losses replaced by reinforcements emerging from hyperspace. More dreadnoughts, more cruisers, more destroyers. Admiral Lexmer intended to finish this war the same way his ancestors had finished the last, one with overwhelming force and absolute brutality. "Captain Kane," HFY said, placing his small hand on Kane's shoulder. "I'd have lived for 600 years, waiting for this moment. I'd have seen my people suffer, watched them fade into quantum sleep, felt their pain across the dimensions. If my death can give them life, no," Kane said firmly. "There's always another way, always." But as the Korthic fleet advanced, their weapons charging for a final devastating barrage, Kane wondered if this time he might be wrong. The Korthic reinforcements emerged from hyperspace in a formation that blotted out the stars. 16 dreadnoughts, their hulls scarred from centuries of conquest. 43 cruisers, their weapons already charging, over 100 destroyers, moving in perfect synchronization like a school of metallic predators. Admiral Lexmer's voice boomed across all frequencies. "This is the final hour of the Velter infection. Today, we complete what our ancestors began. Today, we ensure the galaxy remains pure." The surviving Velter ships, only 7 remained from the original dozen, formed a defensive formation around the quantum emergence point where more of their kind might still materialize. Their crystalline hulls pulsed with desperate energy. "Beautiful and doomed, HFY," Kane said, gripping the child's shoulder. "I need you to trust me. Can you communicate with the awakened Velter?" "Yes, But Captain, no buts. Tell them to link their ship's quantum matrices to mine. Tell them to trust a human who's too stubborn to die quietly. The child's eyes widened, then closed in concentration across the tactical display. The Velter ships began to glow more brightly, their whole pattern shifting to match the crystalline growth covering the Wanderer's end. The Korthic attack began, with a barrage that lit up the entire system. Plasma cannons, particle beams, and quantum torpedoes filled the space between the fleets with deadly energy. The first Velter ship to take the brunt of the assault was a graceful cruiser whose hull had been grown rather than built. The concentrated fire from 6 Korthic dreadnoughts tore through its living crystal structure, and the ship's death scream echoed through the quantum foam. But as it died, something extraordinary happened. The ship's consciousness didn't dissipate. It flowed into the remaining Velter vessels, strengthening them, making them more than they had been. The Korthic had expected the Velter to fight as individuals. They hadn't prepared for a collective consciousness that grew stronger with each sacrifice. The battle became a dance of death in 3 dimensions. Korthic ships moved in rigid formations, their tactics proven over centuries of warfare. The Velter flowed like water, phasing through dimensions, appearing behind enemy lines only to phase out again before the return fire could destroy them. A Korthic cruiser, the Bone Cleaver, thought it had trapped a Velter destroyer in a crossfire. The alien ship seemed to accept its fate, allowing the Korthic weapons to strike home. But instead of being destroyed, the Velter vessel absorbed the energy and redirected it into a beam that cut the Bone Cleaver in half. The Korthic crew had time for one final scream before their ship's reactor went critical. They're learning, Kane observed, watching the tactical display. The Velter are adapting to Korthic tactics in real time. We always did, HFY replied, his voice now carrying the harmonics of multiple consciousnesses. It is why the Korthic feared us so much centuries ago. We do not just fight, we become the battle itself, but adaptation had its limits. The Korthic had brought overwhelming force, and even the most skilled fighters couldn't overcome simple mathematics. A second Velter ship died under concentrated fire from 3 dreadnoughts, its hull cracking like an eggshell. Then a third, caught between 2 cruiser squadrons with nowhere to phase. The quantum emergence point flickered as HFY's life force weakened. The child was pale now, his crystalline skin losing its luster. I cannot maintain the connection much longer, he whispered. On the main screen, Admiral Dexmer S. Worldbreaker pushed forward, its massive bulk surrounded by an escort of destroyers. The ship's main weapon, a plasma cannon the size of a city block, began to charge. Kane had seen similar weapons reduce entire planets to cooling magma. Target, the quantum emergence point, Dexmer announced. We will seal the dimensional rift and ensure no more Velter abominations enter our reality. He's right, Kane realized with growing horror. If he destroys the emergence point, the sleeping Velter will be trapped in the quantum foam forever. They'll never wake up. The remaining Velter ships only for now threw themselves at the Worldbreaker in a desperate attempt to stop the massive weapon from firing. Their attacks were precise and beautiful, carving through the dreadnought's escort with surgical precision. But the Worldbreaker was built to withstand the death of stars. Its shields held. Its whole armor absorbed the worst of the assault. The plasma. HFY, Kane said urgently, I need you to do something for me, something that might kill us both. The child looked up at him with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. What do you need? Captain, I need you to link my ship directly to the emergence point, not through the other Velter ships directly. Quantum entanglement at the molecular level. That will destroy your ship, Captain, and probably your mind. Maybe. But it might also give us one chance to save your people. HFY nodded slowly. You are truly the most stubborn human I have ever encountered, Captain Kane. Very well. But know that if this fails, we die together. I can live with that. The child placed both hands on the ship's console, and Kane felt the Wanderer's end become something more than metal and circuits. He felt the quantum foam flowing through his consciousness, felt the sleeping Velter stirring in their dimensional prison, and for one brief moment, he understood what the Korthic had been so afraid of 2 centuries ago. The Velter weren't just another species, they were evolution itself. Consciousness unbound by the limitations of matter, they were what every species could become, given enough time and wisdom. No wonder the Korthic had tried to destroy them. The Worldbreaker's plasma cannon fired, its beam aimed directly at the quantum emergence point. But Kane and the Wanderer's end were there to meet it. The ship's hull now fully transformed into living crystal that bent space around itself. The collision between the plasma beam and the ship's quantum-enhanced hull created an explosion that could be seen from the next star system. The explosion should have vaporized everything within 100,000 kilometers. Instead, it created something that had never existed before, a stable quantum rift in normal space, a doorway between dimensions that shimmered with possibilities. Kane found himself floating in a space that wasn't quite space. His consciousness somehow separated from his body while still connected to the Wanderer's end. The ship had been transformed beyond recognition, no longer metal and circuits, but something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Captain HFY's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. We have created a paradox. The Korthic weapon was designed to seal dimensional rifts. Instead, it has torn one permanently open. Through the rift, Kane could see them, thousands of Velter consciousnesses, sleeping in the quantum foam, waiting for the signal to awaken. They were beautiful and terrible, beings of pure thought that had transcended the limitations of physical existence. But they were also dying. They'd been sleeping along. Kane realized, without physical anchors, they're fading away. Yes, HFY confirmed. The quantum sleep was meant to be temporary, but 2 centuries of isolation have taken their toll. Most of my people are too weak to return to physical form. On the other side of the rift, the Korthic fleet had recovered from the shock of the explosion. Admiral HFY's Worldbreaker hung in space, its massive hull scarred but intact. The surviving Velter ships were trying to hold position around the rift, but they were vastly outnumbered. Sir, came a transmission from one of the Korthic destroyers. The quantum rift is destabilizing. Our sensors show massive energy fluctuations. That we finish this quickly, HFY replied. All ships concentrated fire on the rift. We'll collapse it and seal the Velter in their quantum prison forever. The Korthic fleet opened fire with everything they had: plasma cannons, particle beams, quantum torpedoes, and avalanche of destruction aimed at the shimmering doorway between dimensions. The surviving Velter ships threw themselves into the path of the weapons, their crystalline hulls cracking under the assault. They're sacrificing themselves to protect the rift, Kane observed. As they should, HFY replied. But it will not be enough. The Korthic have too many ships, too much firepower. Kane watched as another Velter ship died, its hull fragmenting into 1,000 pieces of crystal that continued to glow with inner light. Even as they scattered through space, 3 ships left, then 2, then 1. The last Velter vessel, a destroyer, whose hull was already cracked and bleeding energy, positioned itself directly in front of the rift. Its captain's voice echoed through the quantum foam for the memory of what we were, and the hope of what we might become. The ship exploded in a flash of light that temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. When the glare faded, nothing stood between the Korthic fleet and the quantum rift. All ships, fire, Admiral HFY commanded. The concentrated barrage struck the rift with enough force to shatter. A moon, space twisted, reality bent, and the doorway between dimensions began to collapse. On the other side, the sleeping Velter consciousnesses cried out in despair as their last hope for return began to fade. No, Kane said, his voice carrying across multiple dimensions. I didn't come this far to watch you die. He reached out with his consciousness, still linked to the Wanderer's end through HFY's quantum entanglement. The ship responded to his will, its transformed hull extending tendrils of living crystal toward the collapsing rift. Captain, what are you doing? HFY asked. Something stupid, Kane replied. I'm going to stabilize the rift by becoming part of it. That's impossible. The energy would kill me, yes, but it might also give your people the anchor they need to return to physical form. Kane felt the Wanderers and merge with the quantum rift, felt his consciousness spread across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The pain was indescribable, like being torn apart at the atomic level, while remaining aware of every separation. But he held on, using his will to keep the doorway open. Through the rift, the sleeping Velter began to stir, their consciousnesses, given new hope by Kane's sacrifice, started to coalesce into physical form. Ship after ship began to emerge from the quantum foam, not the few dozen that HFY could have awakened, but hundreds, thousands, impossible. Admiral HFY breathed as the first wave of Velter vessels appeared in normal space. Our intelligence said they were extinct. Your intelligence, came a new voice. Broadcast on all frequencies, was incomplete. The speaker was clearly Velter, but there was something different about this one. where HFY's voice carried the innocence of youth. This consciousness radiated the wisdom of ages. It was ancient, powerful, and utterly without mercy. I am BlackHFY, High Commander of the Velter Restoration Fleet. 2 centuries ago, your people committed genocide against mine. Today, we discuss the price of that crime. The Korthik fleet found itself outnumbered for the first time in living memory. Velter ships continued to pour through the rift, their hulls gleaming with the light of returning life. But these weren't the same vessels that had fought in the original war. These ships had been redesigned during their quantum sleep, enhanced with technologies that had been theoretical when the Korthik first attacked. Admiral, one of the HFY's subordinates transmitted, recommend immediate withdrawal. Our fleet is outnumbered 20 to 1 and increasing. Negative, the HFY replied. We make our stand here. If we flee now, the Velter will spread across the galaxy like a plague. Signal all Korthik fleets we need reinforcements, all of them. But it was too late for reinforcements. The Velter had waited to centuries for this moment, and they intended to make it count. The final battle for the Kepler Nebula lasted 18 hours and reshaped the political landscape of the galaxy. When it ended, the Korthik hegemony had lost 60% of their total fleet strength, and Admiral HFY's Worldbreaker was nothing but cooling debris drifting through space. Kane found himself back in his physical body, standing on the bridge of a ship that was no longer entirely his own. The Wanderer's end had been transformed by its contact with the quantum rift, its hull now bearing the same crystalline patterns that marked Velter technology, but it was still recognizably human in design, a perfect fusion of 2 species' engineering philosophies. Status report, he said, his voice hoarse from the quantum entanglement experience. The Korthik fleet has been destroyed or scattered, HFY replied. The child looked older now, his experiences having aged him in ways that transcended mere time. My people are free to reclaim their place in the galaxy through the bridge's viewports. King could see the aftermath of the battle. Velter ships moved through the debris field, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns as they cataloged the destruction. Some paused over the wreckage of Korthik vessels, extending tendrils of living metal to extract survivors. Even after 2 centuries of genocide, the Velter chose mercy over vengeance. Captain Kane, a new voice said, and Kane turned to see a figure materializing on his bridge. The Velter was tall, graceful, its crystalline skin shifting through spectrums of color that human eyes couldn't quite process. This was BlackHFY, the High Commander, whose voice had turned the tide of battle. High Commander, Kane replied, not sure of the proper protocol for addressing a being whose species had just returned from extinction. You have done something unprecedented, BlackHFY continued, its voice carrying harmonics that made the bridge's instruments resonate. A human has served as quantum anchor for an entire species' resurrection. The implications will ripple through the galaxy for millennia. Kane looked at his hands, which still bore faint traces of the crystalline patterns that had covered them. During the quantum entanglement, I just did what felt right. That kid needed help, and I wasn't going to let the Korthik finish what they started. That kid, BlackHFY said with something that might have been amusement, is my nephew, and the heir to the Velter imperial throne. The revelation hit Kane like a physical blow. He's what? The last emperor died in the quantum sleep 50 years ago, HFY explained quietly. I have been carrying the genetic encoding for imperial succession ever since, but I was too young, too inexperienced to awaken our people alone. I needed. He looked at Kane with eyes that now held flecks of gold. I needed someone who would save a child, without asking questions, someone who would fight impossible odds. Out of simple stubbornness, the Terran Defense Corps will want a full report. Came a familiar voice from the comm system. Commander Voss materialized on the bridge, her image flickering as it transmitted through quantum channels. Her ship, the Shadowhawk, was visible through the viewport, its hull bearing scars from the battle, but still intact. Commander, Kane said, relief evident in his voice. I thought you were destroyed when the base went up. The base was designed to be expendable, Voss replied. What matters is that the Velter have returned. The balance of power in this galaxy just shifted permanently. She was right. Over the following months, as news of the Velter resurrection spread throughout known space, the effects were immediate and profound. Worlds that had lived under Korthik oppression for generations suddenly found themselves with protectors who understood the cost of extinction. Species that had been hunted to near extinction were offered sanctuary in Velter space. The Korthik hegemony Faced with enemies who possessed technology beyond their understanding and the moral authority of genocide survivors, found their empire crumbling from within. World after world declared independence, knowing that the Welter would protect them from retaliation. But perhaps the most significant change was the formation of the Human-Welter Alliance. For the first time in galactic history, the species had achieved true symbiosis not through conquest or subjugation, but through mutual respect and shared sacrifice. Kane found himself appointed as the first human ambassador to the restored Welter Empire, a position that came with a ship that existed in multiple dimensions and responsibilities that spanned star systems. But he never forgot the moment that started it all, a child's cry for help in the darkness of space, and the decision to answer it without hesitation. "Do you ever regret it?" HFY asked him one day as they stood on the bridge of the Wanderers and watching the construction of New Welteron, the first city built jointly by humans and Welter. The child, now officially Emperor HFY I, had grown into his role with wisdom beyond his years. "Regret saving your life?" "Never," Kane replied, "but I have to ask, was any of this planned?" The emergency beacon, Commander Voss showing up at exactly the right moment. The hidden base. HFY's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Captain, do you really think it was coincidence that a Welter child ended up on a human cargo ship, wounded but not dead, just as the Korthik launched their final sweep for survivors?" Kane stared at him. "You little, I prefer your Imperial Majesty," HFY said with a grin that was entirely to human. "But yes, Captain, sometimes the best way to save a species is to trust in the fundamental decency of another. My people studied humans for decades before I was sent to find you. We knew that faced with a child in danger, humans would react with compassion rather than calculation, and if you'd been wrong, then both our species would have remained extinct, yours from Korthik conquest, mine from quantum decay. But you proved what my people always suspected, that humanity's greatest strength isn't your technology or your weapons. It's your stubborn refusal to let the innocent suffer when you have the power to help." Kane looked out at the city rising from the planet's surface. Its spires a fusion of human engineering and Welter organic architecture. Children of both species played in the parks between buildings, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Well," he said finally, "I guess being stubborn finally paid off." The galaxy had been dark for centuries, ruled by fear and oppression, but sometimes all it takes to light the darkness is one person willing to help a child in need. The Welter had learned this truth during their long sleep in the quantum foam, and they had trusted that truth to save both their species and the galaxy itself. They had not been disappointed. In the years that followed, the Human-Welter Alliance would become the foundation for a new galactic civilization, one built on cooperation rather than conquest, understanding rather than fear. And historians would mark the beginning of this new age not with the great battles or political negotiations, but with a simple moment on a cargo ship, the decision of one stubborn human to answer a child's cry for help. Some called it destiny, others called it chance. Kane preferred to call it humanity at its best, the moment when doing the right thing mattered more than the consequences. And in the end,